Nobody in that restaurant thought a glass of soda could change the course of 3 lives in under 60 seconds. But that is exactly what happened on a Friday night in downtown Miami, in a private dining room glowing with candlelight and old money, where a waitress named Alara was about to be humiliated in front of 40 of the city's wealthiest people, and where the man everyone in that room was desperate to impress was about to walk through the door and call her something nobody expected to hear. Alara had been on her feet for 9 hours straight. Her lower back ached in that dull, constant way that only people who work service jobs really understand. The kind of ache you stop noticing until you sit down and it hits you all at once. She wasn't supposed to be working the private event that night. She'd been pulled in last minute because 2 servers called out sick. And the restaurant, an upscale steakhouse called Pharaoh, was hosting the biggest dinner of the year. The Belmont family, owners of a fast-growing hospitality chain, were throwing an elaborate dinner to court a mystery investor whose name hadn't even been confirmed on the guest list. All anyone knew was that this investor's signature on one contract could triple the size of their company. And the Belmonts wanted every detail to be flawless. Alara didn't care about any of that. She cared about her shift ending, about picking up her little brother from her neighbor's apartment, about the exhaustion sitting behind her eyes like sand. She wore her hair pulled back tight, her white blouse pressed, her name tag, Alara, pinned crooked over her heart, because she'd clipped it on in a hurry in the break room mirror. She was good at her job. She was polite, even when people weren't polite back. She had learned, a long time ago, how to disappear into the role of waitress, so completely that people forgot she was a person standing 3 feet away from them, listening to every word. That's how she heard everything the Belmonts said about her before the night went wrong. She heard the mother, Diane Belmont, in her emerald green gown and diamonds that could have paid Alara's rent for a decade, tell her son under her breath that the "help tonight looks tired. Get someone better next time." She heard the father, Richard Belmont, laugh at his own joke about how waitresses are the cheapest form of entertainment in this town. And she heard the son, Julian Belmont, 28 years old, dressed in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Alara made in 3 months, mocking her under his breath to his friends every time she walked past with a tray. Julian was the kind of rich that made him forget other people had names. He'd grown up being told the world owed him applause just for showing up, and by the time he hit his late 20s, he genuinely believed it. He was set to take over as CEO of Belmont Hospitality within the year. And tonight, more than anything, he wanted to look powerful in front of the mystery investor his parents kept whispering about. The trouble started around 8:40, when Julian ordered a second round of drinks and complained loudly that his Coca-Cola tasted flat. Alara apologized and offered to bring a fresh one immediately. It was a small, ordinary moment, the kind that happens in restaurants 100 times a night without incident. But Julian had been drinking since 6, and he had an audience of college friends at his table who laughed a little too hard at everything he said, and somewhere in his head, humiliating a waitress in front of them felt like entertainment. "You know what?" Julian said, standing up as Alara approached with the fresh glass. "Let me show you how flat it actually is." Before she could react, before anyone at the table could stop him, he grabbed the full glass from her tray, tilted it sideways, and poured it directly over her head. The room went silent in that particular way, that only happens right before chaos breaks loose. Cold soda soaked through Alara's hair, ran down the back of her neck, stained the collar of her white blouse, a deep amber brown. She stood frozen for a second, not from pain, but from the sheer public nature of it. 40 strangers watching, phones already lifting to record, laughter breaking out from Julian's table like it was the funniest thing they'd seen all week. Diane Belmont, instead of being horrified, actually laughed and pointed, calling it The best thing that happened all night. Richard Belmont chuckled along with his son, clearly more concerned about the show being amusing than the woman standing there humiliated. Two security guards, hired for the event, started moving toward Alara, not toward Julian. Because someone had already murmured that she needs to be removed before the investor arrives. Alara felt her throat tighten, that hot, prickling feeling behind the eyes that comes right before tears you're desperately trying to hold back. She had been humiliated before in her life. She had been overlooked, underestimated, talked down to, but never quite like this. Never in front of an entire room. Never with a name tag, reading Alara pinned crooked over a soaked blouse, while wealthy strangers laughed like it was a show put on for their entertainment. "I think it's time for you to head out," one of the security guards said quietly, almost apologetically, as if he hated the words as much as she did. And that's exactly the moment the double doors at the far end of the private dining room opened. A man walked in. Tall, dressed simply but expensively, the kind of quiet wealth that doesn't need to announce itself with logos or loud colors. He had the calm, unhurried energy of someone who was used to rooms going quiet the moment he entered them. Not because he demanded it, but because people simply sensed who he was. Diane Belmont's smile snapped instantly, from cruel amusement to desperate, practiced charm. Richard Belmont straightened his jacket so fast, he nearly knocked over a wine glass. Julian froze mid-laugh, his hand still holding the empty glass. This was him, the investor, the man they had planned this entire evening around. His name was Adrian Cole, 34 years old, founder of a hospitality and real estate investment firm so private that most people in the room had only ever seen his name in headlines. Never his face. He had built his fortune from almost nothing, and unlike most men with his kind of money, he was known, quietly, for something the Belmonts had somehow overlooked in their research. He cared, obsessively, about how companies treated the people at the bottom of their organization chart, not the people at the top. Adrian's eyes moved across the room in one slow sweep, taking in the frozen tableau, the laughing guests, the security guards closing in on someone, and then his gaze landed on Alara, standing there, soaked, humiliated, soda dripping down her collar, her eyes glassy with tears she refused to let fall. For a moment, nobody understood what happened next. Adrian didn't greet the Belmonts first. He didn't shake Richard's outstretched hand or acknowledge Diane's rehearsed smile. He walked straight past all of them, crossed the entire length of that private dining room in long, purposeful strides, and stopped directly in front of Alara. "My love," he said, his voice low, urgent, and completely unguarded. "What happened to you?" The room did not just go quiet. It went dead silent, the kind of silence where you could hear ice settling in glasses across the room. Diane Belmont's champagne flute slipped slightly in her hand. Richard Belmont's face drained of color so fast it looked almost comedic. Julian stood there holding an empty glass, his mouth slightly open, his mind clearly trying and failing to process what he had just heard. Alara looked up at Adrian, and, for the first time all night, something in her chest loosened. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though her voice shook slightly. "It's fine, Adrian." "It's not fine," he said, already shrugging off his jacket and placing it gently around her soaked shoulders, his hands steady, his eyes never leaving her face. "Nothing about this is fine." Diane Belmont finally found her voice, though it came out thin and shaking. "Mr. Cole, I don't understand. Do you two know each other?" Adrian turned to face the family slowly, and the warmth that had been in his voice when speaking to Alara disappeared entirely, replaced by something colder, sharper, the voice of a man who built and broke business deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "Know each other?" he repeated. "She's my wife?" The words landed like a physical blow. Julian's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor. the sound cutting through the silence like a gunshot. Several guests actually gasped out loud. Diane Belmont's perfectly composed face cracked entirely, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. Adrian continued, his tone measured but merciless. 3 months ago, I told your team I wanted to personally evaluate how Belmont Hospitality treats its staff before I committed a single dollar of my firm's money. I told them, specifically, that I wanted an unannounced evaluation. No advance notice, no special treatment. Because I have learned, the hard way, that companies show you exactly who they are. Not in the boardroom, but in how they treat the people serving their coffee and clearing their tables. He paused, letting that sink in, his eyes moving across every face at the head table. My wife volunteered to be that evaluation. She has worked 3 different shifts at 3 different Belmont properties over the past month, under her maiden name. Exactly like any other employee. No special treatment, no advance warning to your staff. I wanted to see, honestly, without any performance for my benefit, how your family treats people who have no power in the room. Alara stood beside him, soaked, shivering slightly, but with her chin lifted now, her eyes clear and steady, watching the Belmont family absorb what they had just done. And tonight, Adrian continued, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous, I walked in to find your son pouring a drink over my wife's head while you. He looked directly at Diane, laughed, and called it entertainment. And you, his eyes shifted to Richard, were more concerned about my arrival than about a human being being humiliated in front of 40 witnesses. Julian finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and desperate. Mr. Cole, I swear, I had no idea. If I had known who she was. That's exactly the problem. Adrian cut him off, his voice sharp enough to silence the entire room again. It shouldn't matter who she is. She could have been anyone. She could have been someone with no name, no connections, no husband with $100 million signature you're all chasing tonight. And the way you treated her should have been exactly the same. Because that's what character actually is. It's not how you treat people when you think someone important is watching. It's how you treat them when you think nobody important is. Diane Belmont's eyes filled with tears, though whether from shame or the sudden collapse of everything they had worked toward that night, it was hard to tell. Mr. Cole, please, we can make this right. We can. You can't, Adrian said simply. Not tonight. Not with an apology performed for an audience. I came here tonight, prepared to sign a deal that would have changed the trajectory of your company for the next decade. Instead, I watched your son humiliate my wife for entertainment, and I watched both of you enjoy it. He turned back to Alara, his expression softening instantly, the coldness melting away as quickly as it had appeared. Let's go home, he said gently. You're freezing. As they turned to leave, Julian, desperate and unraveling, called out one final time. Wait, please. This doesn't have to end the deal. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. Adrian paused at the door, not even turning fully around. The deal ended, he said quietly. The moment you decided a person's worth depends on whether they're rich enough to matter to you. I don't invest in companies that think that way. I never will. The doors closed behind them, and the silence that followed in that private dining room was the loudest sound of the entire night. What the Belmonts didn't know, what nobody in that room fully understood until the story broke weeks later, was that Alara wasn't just Adrian Cole's wife, quietly enjoying a life of luxury behind his fortune. She had built her own reputation long before meeting him, working her way up from nothing, through community college and night shifts, and years of exhausting labor most people never see, into a woman who genuinely understood what it meant to be overlooked. When she married Adrian, she made one request that surprised even him. That she never stop working real jobs, never stop standing in rooms where people didn't know her name. Because that, she told him, was the only way to keep seeing the world clearly. The story of that night spread fast. First through whispered gossip among Miami's social circles, then through business news outlets, then across social media, where a video someone had quietly recorded on their phone showed the entire moment. The pour, the laughter, and Adrian Cole crossing that room to kneel by his soaked wife and call her "my love" in front of everyone. Belmont Hospitality's stock dropped within days. Investors who had been considering deals with the family quietly withdrew. Unwilling to be associated with a company whose culture had just been exposed on a global stage, Julian Belmont resigned from his position within the month, his path to CEO gone entirely. His name now permanently attached to a viral moment of cruelty he could never fully outrun. Alara, for her part, didn't chase headlines or interviews. She went back to her ordinary life for a while, back to picking up her little brother, back to quiet mornings with Adrian before his long workdays began. But something had shifted in her. A quiet confidence that came from being seen, finally, fully, in front of the people who had tried to make her feel small. Months later, she and Adrian launched a foundation together, one built specifically to support hospitality workers, service staff, and low-wage employees across the country, funding legal protections against workplace humiliation, providing emergency support for workers facing exactly the kind of public degradation she had experienced that night. It became one of the most respected labor advocacy foundations in the country within 2 years. Not because of Adrian's money alone, but because Alara insisted on running it the way she wished someone had run things for her, with dignity, with respect, and with the simple, radical belief that no person serving your drink is worth less than the person drinking it. Sometimes, at events for the foundation, people would ask Alara if she ever thought about that night, about the humiliation, the cold soda running down her collar, the laughter of strangers who thought her pain was entertainment. She would smile, a little tired, a little wise, and tell them the same thing every time. That night didn't break her. It revealed everyone else. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered.